Good evening, everyone. Welcome to CIIS Public Programs and Performances. Tonight we're going to have a lecture by Rick Tarnas that's going to be followed up by a workshop presentation tomorrow morning from 10 to 1. And so I hope that some of you will be there. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Rick Tarnas. Here he is.
Testing, 1, 2, 3, 4. Matthew, can you hear me okay in the back? Yeah, great. Nice, short and sweet intro. I really appreciate that. I was telling her beforehand that I almost live in this room. I give so many lectures here, classes and so forth. It's where most of my classes take place. So, welcome to the annual State of the World report we do here. And I'm curious how many, I think this is maybe the fourth one that I've done in the fall as a public program, as where we kind of look at the world transits, I think 2008, 09, 10, 11, I think that's right. Have any of you or many of you been here for earlier ones of these, like last year or anything like that? Yeah. So you'll clearly we've got, on the one hand, the planets are. The larger picture, the larger planetary picture, continues to unfold. Though we set out the basics even from the beginning of this series, but one of the great advantages we have here now is that it's, each year that passes, these archetypal energies that you can see coming, that you can look back in history and see the correlations with previous times that these particular alignments have come up, so that you can you have a basis upon which to glimpse what kinds of cultural and historical phenomena could take place. Now a year later, a year has gone by, and we've had a year of pretty much, well, what you might call breaking news, where the very powerful forces at work in the collective psyche that we've been discussing all along have been actualized. They've gone from a kind of potentiality, a potential wave pattern, into a concrete form. They've concressed, to use Whitehead's term. They've moved from the there's a quantum physics phrase called the collapse of the wave function, kind of an interesting term, but mathematically it's just moving from like this kind of probability wave over the several year period, and then it moves into like, here's where the particle is. This is now, it's collapsed into a concrete event out of the range of potentials that it could have manifested as. And from that little description, you can see some of the underlying assumptions that we enter into this presentation or discussion or analysis with, and that is, we're not looking at concretely predictive, linear, causal kinds of phenomena. It's not like the planets are in a certain position and therefore these specific things happen in a kind of Newtonian, Cartesian, predictive way. The kind of astrology that we have found to be most helpfully illuminating for human experience, using our own, where you're not drawing on clairvoyant or powers of divinatory divinatory special capacities, but rather you're drawing on a capacity to to recognize symbolic patterns, to have what James Hillman called an archetypal eye, to have cultivated or developed an archetypal eye where you can see those symbolic patterns at work, and you have the data, where you can see the correlations over a long enough period of time in history that we can look at this time and come to a way of illuminating it. Now, I mentioned James Hillman, and I'd like to maybe start this evening with a little dedication of the evening to him. He just passed away, as many of you know, at age 85, and he really is a crucial figure in the development of, certainly of the evolution of depth psychology in the 20th century period. He's one of the great cultural critics and commentators and public intellectuals of our time. He was also a huge influence in my life, and he also very much shaped the archetypal cosmology and archetypal astrology that we, in this, particularly this community of about 70 or 80 of us here, that came out of originally the work that Stan Groff and I did at Esalen, and then has been centered here at California Institute of Integral Studies. The Archetypal Research Collective, the Conjunctio, the Neptune Group, there's quite a few remarkable organizations and collectives that are doing this research that all basically came through the Philosophy, Cosmology, and Consciousness program, PCC here. So when I say we, I'm referring to this larger kind of community of researchers and students of this mystery that we're exploring tonight. So James Hillman was really one of our major mentors, and his loss was a poignant one. So this is when his wife Margot wrote to me the morning, wrote to a number of close friends on the morning of his death that he had passed away. I shared this with our philosophy group here. I'll just let the siren play itself out and kind of moment of silence for her. James Hillman, one of our great mentors, died this morning at his home in Connecticut. He was 85. His wife Margot said he was true to his character to the end, even as he moved into that place between day and night, speaking through the night in many languages, very funny, and himself. During these last several months, despite the pain and the meds needed to manage it, he had bone cancer, James had managed to finish the many projects he'd been intensely committed to completing before he left. May I just add, in tribute to him as a friend, how deeply James has enriched us with his unending flow of insights, placing so many things in a new light and in shadow. His depth of soul and reading and culture, his trickster wit, his heretic originality, his sharp-edged individuality. He will be deeply missed, but he left us with so much that we will be integrating for a long time to come. It was just over 30 years ago that he came to San Francisco, and he presented for the first time what would later become his profound and influential essay, Anima Mundi, the return of the soul to the world. It was, I happened to be there. Stan Groff and I drove up from Big Sur. It was the American Academy of Psychoanalysis, and at this session he presented the first of several times that he presented it until it climaxed, giving it in Florence, Italy, where he received the kind of keys to the city as kind of great honor of all his work on behalf of the Italian Renaissance. And this essay really was a turning point in depth psychology. And I'll just quote this one passage from it that, in a sense, serves as a kind of epigraph for tonight, and really for the work that our Philosophy, Cosmology, and Consciousness program as a whole is very committed to. Brian Swim and Stan Groff, Sean Kelly, Robert McDermott, Charlene Spretnak in earlier years, David Ulansey, Joanna Macy, and now Elizabeth Allison's in our program too, all marvelous teachers. This is James Hillman. Ecology movements, futurism, feminism, urbanism, protest and disarmament, personal individuation. All these cannot alone save the world from the catastrophe inherent in our very idea of the world. They all require a cosmological vision that saves the phenomenon world itself. They all require a move in soul that goes beyond measures of expediency to the archetypal source of our world's continuing peril, the fateful neglect, the repression of the anima mundi. May he rest in peace and live on here through us as he would have wished. So, and you can see, I mean, really while tonight I'm using these indications, as it were, that the anima mundi gives us out of a kind of, I mean, on the one hand, it's a sort of generosity of spirit on the part of the cosmos, and a kind of playful artistry that the cosmos does, that it would have these constant orchestrations of correlation between the human world of experience, collective and private, and at the same, all connected to the macrocosm, to the movements of the planets in the solar system. It's a great, it's a great mystery that it exists at all. This constant Niagara fall of coincidences, and it's a kind of trickster delight in defying gravity, as it were. Certainly defying disenchanted gravity, so to speak. It's also a delight in patterning, in art, in the artistry of life and of the universe. But I think it's also an act of care on the part of the cosmos that this Earth, moving in its constant many modes of movement at once through space and seemingly this peripheral meaning-seeking speck of dust in the vast cosmos, should be a focus of cosmic meaning, is a kind of continuing miracle. I remember my friend Terence McKenna used to say, we're looking for extraterrestrial intelligence the way we are so often looking for it, is like trying to find a good Italian restaurant out there in the universe. It's just, it's a crazy mode of looking for something that we're actually able to access in a much more pervasive and powerful way. And talk about the intelligence of extraterrestrial intelligence that's at work. It saturates the cosmos. It's breathing it all the time. And so everything that we are about to talk about as far as the correlations of the dynamics of what's happening in our moment in history, part of the purpose of doing that is to give us greater capacity to cooperate co-creatively in the drama of our time. These are powerful forces at work, and the more we have a handle on them, that is a conceptual and imaginative and emotional and somatic feel for what's happening, we can be more intelligent in participating in their unfolding rather than being puppets of the unconscious, basically, which is, so you can see how this kind of depth astrology is continuing the depth psychology project of making the unconscious conscious, and thereby allowing us to be more free, more creative. But I also want to emphasize that everything we do tonight is also serving this other purpose of, in some sense, allowing us to reconnect to the whole, to realize that we aren't this isolated oddity of consciousness in a vast, unconscious, meaningless void, but instead we are embedded in and expressive of intelligence that is working through the cosmos, through and through, at all levels. Okay, so that's prelude, and now what we're looking at tonight in terms, the picture in some sense is relatively simple that we're going to be focusing on. We're looking at the outer planets that we have the most both historical data for, that we have also a universal consensus amongst practicing contemporary astrologers about their meanings. Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. All those there is, no major disagreement about what the meanings are, what the consistent archetypal principles that are expressed in correlations, in birth charts, in personal transits, in world transits. So we're working with those. There are certainly many other factors that we may someday be able to speak with some plausibility about their likely relevance to understanding our time, and certainly the sign positions of the outer planets, or or things like the Chiron, or the other planetoids that are being discovered. But I'm enough of a scientist to want to basically be working with what we have adequate data and adequate foundation for conceptually, that we can speak with some foundation, with some authority about their meanings and likely effects. And secondly, at the same time, I'm enough committed to the humanities, to humanistic scholarship, to know that we're working with symbolic principles. So you have to draw on your capacity for symbolic discernment, the capacity for imaginative insight, not airy-fairy, but just with that same capacity that every good Jungian analyst employs when they are listening intelligently to a dream, and picking up on the deeper meanings, Jungian or any part of the larger depth psychology tradition. We can't feed these archetypal principles into a simplistic algorithm, into a computer, and expect to come out with the results. It's much more. It involves more the kind of insight that an historian and a psychologist brings, and not simply a physicist. I mean, not that physics is simple, but not natural sciences. More factors are at work in the human than mainstream modern natural science employs. And then third, as you've heard enough tonight to recognize, besides being committed to the scientific and to the humanistic, I'm enough of a esotericist or a mystic or in the broader sense, or shamanistic orientation to know that we live in an ensouled cosmos, and we're constantly seeing at work the anima mundi, the soul of the universe. So the larger planetary alignments that we can start now to talk about are the Uranus-Pluto square, and let me put these up here. I don't know if everybody's got the symbols, what the glyphs mean, but there's Jupiter, there's Saturn, here's Uranus, here's Neptune, and here's Pluto. Okay, so you can remember those just because they're in order now. And the inner planets, obviously, like the Mercury, Venus, and Mars, or the luminaries, Sun and Moon, hugely important in understanding our personal birth charts, our personal transits, the ongoing, even more fast-moving world transits. But for the bigger picture, where the larger gestalt of the collective psyche can be discerned, these are the big dramatis personae. All right, so we're looking at particularly Uranus square Pluto, the Uranus-Pluto square that goes from basically 2007 to 2020. The orb that we see at work generally with squares is about 10 degrees. And the archetypal principles at work are, on the one hand, Uranus relating to that impulse for change, in a sense, the cosmic impulse for change as well as the human impulse, and for the new, for liberation, for the exciting breakthrough, the sudden trickster upset and disruption of the status quo. It's connected to technological, cultural, any kind of innovation and breakthrough, and that which emancipates us from preceding constraints. It's that impulse that also has a lot to do with it's very unpredictable, very has a kind of exciting electric quality to it, originality, and that impulse towards the new, towards the future, tends to quicken things. It tends to make things happen faster. And the Plutonic, see, anytime you bring in two planets into a major aspect or alignment, you get a mutual activation of those energies. And in this case, Pluto is the second factor, and the Plutonic has to do with that deep, powerful creative and destructive, transformative energy that is in the depths of the earth. It's volcanic. It's in the depths of the body and the psyche. It's the id. It's the instincts. In Freud's sense of the id, it's the will. In Schopenhauer's sense, the will to power. It's Shakti and Kali. It can be both. Whatever it touches, it tends to empower with great force, with mass intensity, and it tends to drive things to extremes. Now you put these two together, and what happens is there's a kind of mutual activation that can be understood as working in both directions. So on the one hand, you have Pluto driving the Uranian, or really it's the Promethean principle. Everything that we know about Uranus is connected to the Promethean, the myth of Prometheus, the great rebel against the old gods, who liberates humanity, who was the cosmic trickster, who carries the fire that kind of carries the solar fire from the heavens to liberate humankind. And while the Plutonic Dionysian potency is driving that. So what you consistently get, those of you who've been here in earlier years, have done courses with me or do your own studies, are very aware how much, like the last time that these two planets were in major alignment, happened to be the conjunction, which is sort of like the Big Bang version of this, 1960 to 72. It's the beginning of this big Uranus-Pluto cycle, and everything that was at work in that decade, a little more than a decade, going into the early 70s, is again at work in our time, and we can certainly see the larger diachronic patterns over time. So in this case, we're seeing that Plutonic energy driving, impelling on a mass scale the impulse for radical change, for freedom, for breaking away from the past, overthrowing dictators and unjust systems, and the old, the sclerotic, the oppressive. You can look back 1787 to 1798. Sorry, 1787 to 98 for an earlier opposition of the same two planets, and see the French Revolution. It's the same energy. Kings are toppled, and the aristocracy, and I mean we're seeing it again now. when the Stones sang "Street Fighting Man," everywhere I hear the sound of marching, charging feet. That's 1968. My name is called disturbance. I shout and scream. I kill the king. I rail at all his servants. It's what's happening in Libya and Syria and Egypt, and in its own form in Wall Street and Oakland and hundreds of cities around our own country. Now, in general, we'll unpack this more in a minute, but I want you to also see how much it goes the other direction as well. Uranus, that Promethean impulse, tends to liberate whatever it touches in sudden, unexpected ways that have often it emancipates what it touches, but not necessarily. These are kind of like there's light and shadow potential in every archetypal principle, and there's nothing built in that is just driving this simply to benign results. And particularly the Plutonic energy has a real potential for instinctual violence, for a mob mentality, for the eruption of the underworld. So what we're seeing here is there's this potential, and on the one hand, for tremendous mass empowerment of emancipatory energies out on the streets, in the in social customs, in the arts, and in individual lives, and at the same time, it's going in the other direction, where there's this. That's so often the impulse for radical change gets associated with such intensity that it can become violent, for example. Even the anti-war demonstrations in the 60s so often spilled over into violence. And even now this decade, where there's such conscientious aspirations and disciplines on the part of, let's say, the Occupy movements in the various cities, there is even with that greater sort of seasoned awareness from knowing how often it could go over too far, and yet at the same time, then right when everybody's kind of gone home for the night or gone into their sleeping bags or whatever, and then that the eruption still takes place, or the killing happens at the edge of the encampment, or sometimes, of course, the violence is constellated by the oppressive regime. So I want to emphasize this larger quality of multivalent potential that can. It's a dicey energy. It tends to be periods in which Uranus and Pluto are in alignment tend to be very exciting to live in. They make the heart beat faster. There's a sense of high drama. Time and the pace of history seems to be accelerating. I mean, think about, for those of you who are old enough, think about the pace of life in the 50s compared to the pace of life in the 60s. Okay, just very, and technologies accelerate. You know, the computer revolution and space program, and so much of what is empowering, say, the Arab Spring, for example, or helping to empower the Arab Spring, or the Occupy movement, the use of the social media to communicate, to group, to organize. These technologies were set in motion, not just the social impulses and political impulses, but the technologies themselves were set into motion in the 1960s. Like the space program helped make possible all sorts of things that we are now using in daily life, because they developed technologies that helped the computer, what we're using with in our social media as a matter of course. I want to so let's think of the two major types of patterning that are at work in any historical examination of astrological correlations. On the one hand, we're looking at synchronic patterns. That is, many things happening at the same time across the world that have the same archetypal quality. So, for example, the fact that you have many cities at once, many countries, many social groups erupting simultaneously, and they're not just doing it because they saw somebody else do it. There is much of that, but this also can happen quite spontaneously in a kind of synchronistic emergence of an archetype on the collective level. You see this, for example, take this period here in the late 18th century, like in the same months that the French Revolution is starting, but within weeks that the Bastille falls, on the other side of the world, no communication possible, the mutiny on the Bounty is taking place. The most famous maritime rebellion in history, Fletcher Christian and the mutiny on the Bounty against William Bligh near Tahiti, that is happening at the same time. They had left, by the way, in 1787 from England. No communication during that time. And in 1789, that's happening, and the Bastille revolt is taking place. That's the constellating of an archetypal complex simultaneously in different parts of the world at the same time. And it also happens in different ways, in a multiplicity of ways at the same time, and that's the multivalence of the archetypes coming through. So that's the synchronic pattern, but then there's a diachronic pattern, which is through time. Like just taking, let's just take, for example, civil rights movement. The abolition movement gets its decisive start in the 1787 to 98 period, and under the next conjunction of the late 1840s, early 50s is when it reaches a peak in the United States. Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin, and the Frederick Douglass, and anyway, going right up to the 60s, of course, the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King. And then under this one, we have Obama becomes president. Same thing. Let's do the same thing with the women's movement. First feminist, great feminist manifesto, Mary Wollstonecraft's Vindication of the Rights of Women, 1793, 2 or 3, right there during this Uranus-Pluto. Then under the next conjunction, which I don't have in here, which went from 1845 to 56. That's when, of course, the women's suffrage movement really takes off. The big meeting in 1848 in New York with thank you, Seneca Falls, with Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucy Mott and Susan B. Anthony. And then, of course, under the 60s, early 70s, you have the women's movement totally takes off. Feminine Mystique, National Organization of Women, and so forth, radical feminism. And now, under this period, you have, for example, those two most powerful social movements of the 60s, women's movement and the civil rights movement. They give us our two leading candidates during the first U.S. election under this next square, were Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. But of course, right across the world, women are on just like there's just been a tremendous push towards empowerment in each country getting its own version. I mean, in Italy, mass demonstrations against that's the Berlusconi government's and Berlusconi media's treatment of women and image of women on the TV and so forth. Or in Yemen, the women, thousands of women demonstrating against the president of Yemen, who had declared that women, it was against Islamic law for women to demonstrate with men against him. And so they demonstrated against him in the thousands. Or in Iran, of course, with the big, they were actually very early in the Middle East with their, that was 2008, wasn't it, when they were having their major mass demonstrations. Was it 09? Thanks, Brian. When they really kicked in and then got suppressed by the Iranian government. But the women, young women, were at the forefront. Again, in Egypt, in Tunisia, here in the United States. So, it's taking many different forms, but it's a decisive diachronic patterning through time. Think of the empowerment. Another typical Uranus-Pluto phenomenon is the empowerment of youth. Uranus, the Promethean archetype, has a special archetypal association with the young because they represent the future, the new, and the impulse for change, for freedom, for innovation, for breaking away from the constraints of the old generation, etc. And here we see over and over again this being played out. Again, how much youth was became politically activated in the 1960s, and again now. And if just looking at the United States, there was no U.S. election between this period and this period when youth were particularly politically active. From the McGovern, Nixon, that was the last time that young people were really active like there was. In 68, it was Eugene McCarthy and Robert Kennedy, and then in 72 election for McGovern, and then there wasn't any emphatic presence of young people until Obama in 2008. It's very characteristic, and there seems to be a kind of mass, the numbers of youth are being there's larger numbers. See, Pluto has a connection with like mass movements, mass energies, and the sheer size of the baby boom in the 60s. And again, there's another particularly in the Arab world, the sheer numbers of young people, and they're being unemployed. And we'll get to the planetary factors involved with that. Unemployment, and in our own country, unemployment and the the massive loan debts, school loan debts that are owed by young people, and the difficulty in getting adequate employment or appropriate employment after coming out of college or graduate schools and so forth. All these are in some sense having the same potentiating influence that in the 60s the Vietnam War was having in motivating motivating young people to get out on the street. Okay, I want to just take, we'll just do a 2-minute clip here of the, this is all of you either read the news or see enough of the news for me not to have to do much of this at all, but this is a very interesting video and we'll just do the first 2 minutes of it, that shows at the beginning of 2011 all the countries in which mass protests, demonstrations, and riots were taking place simultaneously at the beginning of this year. I can get this power thing here. So they're going to do them in alphabetical order, and we'll just watch as I say, the first 2 minutes, and then I'll read off the rest of what they'll be covering. Well, that's right. I'm supposed to give you a 2-minute warning on this. Let me mention, by the way, that one of the things that made this last year especially productive of both bringing a kind of success to the Promethean impulse for change and revolution is that Jupiter came into conjunction with Uranus for this 1 year of the spring of 2011, spring of 2010 to the spring of 2011. So Jupiter and Uranus came into conjunction. This is the same conjunction that was happening, say, when the Bastille and the Mutiny on the Bounty happened, 1789. It lasts only about 14 months, and this was basically this last year, from spring of 2010 to spring of 2011. So the last time that these three planets were in what's called hard aspect alignment was 1968 and 69. Okay, and that was again a period when the kind of phenomena that we're about to see took place. Can we do it now? Great.
More than 20,000 people took to the streets to demand calls for early elections after the country's deputy prime minister resigned over an alleged corruption scandal. Chanting, "Get out, get out." Some of the protesters overturned cars and torched vehicles. Others hurled rocks at police.
Sudden hike in food prices have whipped up anger. Jobless teenagers and young men have had running battles with police in the Algerian capital.
Buenos Aires's main train station was blocked at peak hour as workers demanded the prosecution of railway workers José Pedraza and Juan Carlos Fernández, whom they blame for the murder of Workers' Party member Mariano Ferreira.
The protesters marched on federal government offices demanding a stronger stance from the foreign and prime ministers.
Protesters here today have firmly pointed their anger at Egyptian authorities for failing to protect predominantly Christians in Egypt. But they also want the federal government here in Australia to do more. They're asking Julia Gillard to condemn the attacks.
So it goes on. I mean, they've done Albania, Algeria, Argentina, Australia, Bangladesh, Belgium, Canada, Chile, Cuba, Cyprus, Egypt. This is actually before the Arab Spring was just beginning at this point. So when this was made, they didn't know what was coming. I mean, in many ways, some of the greatest flowerings of this energy took place in the months right after this, under this Jupiter-Uranus conjunction that went right through into the spring, this current spring. Continuing, Egypt, Greece, Honduras, India, Ireland, Israel. That was before the huge tent cities started happening in Israel. Italy, Jordan, Tunisia, Turkey, the United Kingdom. This is before all the riots that were happening just before I went there this summer in London and was it Birmingham? Very huge social unrest. United States, Venezuela, and Yemen. This was before Occupy Wall Street. This is before the Arab Spring had fully taken off. But you get the sense of that same kind of energy as we were having in the 1960s. Let's look at the planet, where the planets are on with the solar fire program. So we're just going to look at the outer planets here. This is actually where they are right now. Pluto is just going over has just set over the western horizon over the Pacific. So essentially this Uranus square Pluto is essentially, which we've been talking about, has been going right across the horizon as we've been talking about, the ascendant, descendant. So it kind of, I didn't plan it that way, but that's the way these things work, is you do things kind of in, everything breathes together, as Plotinus said. You kind of are, we're always in sync with the things tend to be more, whatever planet is, or planetary configurations are aspecting the horizon, the ascendant, descendant axis tends to be more front and center, more foreground, more potentiated. So that was going on. But let's go back to January, say January 1st of this year when they were talking about. Okay, see that Jupiter-Uranus conjunction? So that was very tight at that point. And so it was right while that was happening, almost exact, that the Egyptian, the Tunisian breakthrough took place first, and then the Egyptian. And what's remarkable, I should point out, this is a good example of when sometimes you'll see something, like on Facebook, someone will put in, just a few weeks after this, when Jupiter went into Aries, go forward a couple of months, and you can see how this works. So a month later, Jupiter has gone right into Aries, and so go back 1 month when it's tight. Okay, so one more, but that's it. And so see how they're very tight, just 3 degrees, almost 4 degrees away, very tight conjunction. But someone put on Facebook, Jupiter's gone into Aries, and so we have the revolution in Egypt. Now, Aries being a sign that would seem to support that kind of thing. Now, the problem is that Jupiter goes into Aries every 12 years, and we don't get a revolution in Egypt every 12 years. But every time that Uranus and Pluto come into hard aspect, or what are called the quadrature alignments, the conjunction, and the opposition, which is like the new moon and the full moon point of each cycle, and then the 2 squares, where we're at one of those now, every time that those 2 planets come into major hard aspect, you do get major revolutions right around the world. I don't have to remind you of all the ones that happened in the 60s, all the African nations, Cultural Revolution in China, Revolution in the United States, Europe, 1968, May, Paris, etc., Mexico City, Japan. But go back to the conjunction right before that, 1848, 49, Uranus and Pluto were conjoined, exact same. Virtually every capital in Europe had a revolution take place in a very short period. So that's why we focus on this. Now, go back go back to 2009. In fact, why don't you go back to Obama's election, November, whatever it was, 4th, 2008, and there you see the next thing that I want to focus on, which is the fact that we've been going through see this Saturn opposite Uranus here, how tight that was? And that was beginning the Saturn-Uranus-Pluto T-square. Go forward a few months as Saturn moves forward, and keep going until we get that it draws in the T-square more potently. There you go, a little bit further. Okay, so each month from here on in, it's getting very tight mathematically. It's being drawn in, and that T-square that is one of the most difficult configurations that you can go through. So it basically brings in Saturn into the picture, whose whole nature is to resist or to negate or to create problems or to bring out the shadow side of something, or to involve either reactionary or conservative forces. Positively, it brings out an impulse towards grounding, towards structure, towards maturation and so forth. But this larger T-square of Saturn, Uranus, and Pluto began, it first started coming into orb in 2007, but it's very, very strong 2008 to 11. And in fact, the Saturn-Uranus part of it became exact for the first time right as the election in 08 was taking place in the U.S. And there you got the classic forms of Saturn-Uranus, collapse of structures, sudden unexpected collapse of structures. The stock market collapses in September. The banks and larger financial institutions have an enormous crisis across the world, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And that it also is related to the sharp dichotomy of who was running for president at that point, and in particular the fact that you had a very Promethean figure in the sense of being an African-American young man versus a white, old Republican conservative. Classic Saturn versus Uranus. They also had they combined the two qualities in them. Obama showing himself with all this kind of thoughtful equilibrium, more Saturnian, while McCain was erratic, choosing unexpected running mate, closing down his campaign suddenly, and in general showing a sort of shadow side of the Uranian impulse. So that was all very strongly happening. But the bigger picture of this, when Pluto comes into hard aspect to both Saturn and Uranus, and here's where I need you to start basically integrating three archetypes at once, kind of like juggling three balls. What you're getting here is, on the one hand, see, Pluto, remember how I said it intensifies and empowers whatever it touches. So Pluto is, on the one hand, is driving these Promethean forces, as we've been talking about, and the young, and the reforming, and the impulses towards change, and disruption of the old structure, etc. All that's happening. At the same time, Pluto is empowering the conservative and sometimes reactionary forces involved with Saturn. The last time Saturn and Pluto were in hard aspect came in late 2000 and first came into exact alignment in the late summer and fall of 2001 at the time of 9/11. So basically, as Bush and Cheney come into power in the U.S., kind of selected, as it were, by the Supreme Court in that kind of classic will to power combined with conservative force, just really a kind of a coup. And then 9/11 takes place, which the tremendous trauma of it, and the empowerment of reactionary and conservative forces on both sides. And 2001 to 2004 is dominated by that Saturn-Pluto opposition. Now we've got the square. Right, actually, as Obama comes into office, it wasn't happening yet at the time he was elected. As soon as he came into office, Saturn by that point had come into orb in the square to Pluto. And that kind of rigidity with which every attempt he made to make changes were, that there would just be, it would be filibustered, it would be negated by the conservative forces. or corporate power, or and I don't have to give you all the political background to that. You're very aware of it. This is a very, very difficult combination, because you basically are having the convergence of opposites being empowered in an almost intolerably intense way. And you combine that with the fact that sort of opposition of the past and the future, of the old and the new. You combine that with the tendency in Saturn-Uranus hard aspect alignments for there to be sudden, very difficult collapses of structures, stock market crashes, etc., bubbles burst. Every time Saturn-Uranus comes into hard aspect, you get something like just by itself, without Pluto, just by itself, you get some stock market collapse, such as the last time, for example, with Saturn-Uranus in hard aspect was when the bubble burst for the high-tech Silicon Valley startups. That was the last time when that. And then the one before that was this 1987 stock market crash that affected many people. Black Monday, I think it was, in October of '87. It's a consistent pattern, but much more rare is when Pluto gets involved. We've only had 3 times since the French Revolution that Saturn, Uranus, and Pluto have been in a T-square. And the last time before this one was 1929 to 33, which, of course, was the last time that you had just these same kinds of mass simultaneously, this collapse, this crash of inflated financial and corporate institutions and stock markets, and you also get sudden mass hardship, unemployment, poverty. That's the Saturn-Pluto coming together. They tend to coincide with periods of great hardship and poverty, famine, and it tends to be very traumatic periods. And of course, we've all heard 1,000 times, if we've heard it once, that what we're going through right now since 2008 is the greatest financial crisis since the early 1930s. We've heard it since the 1929 crash and the 30s Great Depression. That's the diachronic pattern working out. And we're conscious of it happening here in the United States, and of course it's so vividly happening in Europe right now. But think about, even before the current European crisis, think about how much, like a country like Iceland, for example, went through, or Ireland. I mean, just kind of this miracle peaking economically, and then just suddenly absolute collapse. And, so it's happening synchronically throughout the world, but diachronically going back through, we see this very powerful pattern. But what's really remarkable is a number of economic historians. I just heard a whole program on this on the BBC last week, but this has been discussed for the last 3 years by Neil Ferguson, the Harvard historian. But now many economic historians are pointing this out, Paul Krugman as well, that the current financial crisis, the Great Recession as it's called, most resembles, there's 2 other mass financial crises and collapses of the stock market globally that this resembles. One was 1929 to 33. The other was the 1873 and the mid-1870s that began what was called the Long Recession. which also brought it dwindled out but lasted for most of the rest of the century. So the most intense period was like the 1873 to 76 period, which also, by the way, catalyzed a lot of anti-Semitic feeling that helped fuel the Austro-Hungarian Empire anti-Semitism that played a role in setting the stage for the generational anti-Semitism that went into Nazism. And because there'd been a more liberal attitude towards the assimilation of Jews prior to that. Anyway, this is 1873 to 76. And the frequent discussions of this are whether the current financial crisis and depression, recession, is going to more resemble the Great Depression, or is it going to more resemble the long depression? But the fact that none of these economic historians are of course conscious of the fact that there happens to have been a planetary configuration that is classic for precisely these kinds of archetypal phenomena. When it happens in individuals in their lives, where you get this as a personal transit or something like that, there's a tendency towards having to hold great tensions of opposites and then sudden collapses of structures, sudden crises. Now there can be very, very good things that come out of this very, very critical crucible that this takes that's involved with this. And it's remarkable that the two depth psychologists who are the most profound explicators of that particular human experience of psychological collapse, of ego death, of the death rebirth initiatory process, Carl Gustav Jung and Stan Grof, were born under these two T-squares. Jung under that one, and Stan Grof under this one. And I mention that because it has great relevance to us, not only in our individual lives, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a second, but also collectively. In some sense, we've known for decades, most of the people in this room, that we lived in an unsustainable civilization. Something had to give. And those of us who knew the evidence of archetypal astrology and the planetary configurations over time were conscious of the fact for a long time that starting at the later part of the last decade, 2007 or 8, and getting very, very strong from 08 through 2011, was going to be a T-square that there was almost no way that we could get through that without a very intense crisis, a collapse of structures. And given everything that was on the table going into it, it was pretty likely that it would involve ecological, financial, as well as political and social structures that would go through a collapse. And the whole question is, just as the question is in psychology, can that collapse, that breakdown, be can it serve a breakthrough? Can it serve as the potentiating matrix for a radical reconfiguration of life structures at the civilizational level, right, and planetary level, ecological level, right down to the microcosm of our own individual lives and our personal relationships and our the way we make a living, the way we make, we conduct our lives. Can we go through a radical reconfiguration of life structures that will be life-enhancing? Because this particular T-square, as I said last year or the year before when we were first describing it, can be, if we were to simplistically summarize it, it's the volcanically intense evolutionary pressures impelling the radical reconfiguration of life structures, usually through collapse of some kind, certainly through crisis and great tension, often accidents, mistakes. Think about Alan Greenspan giving his testimony before Congress, as it's clear just how profoundly the policies that he supported and oversaw were intertwined with and in a deep way co-responsible for the collapse of the financial markets. And he said, there was a mistake. I made a mistake. There was a mistake in my ideology. His free market ideology. And now here's the example. We have a tendency, particularly in this kind of countercultural milieu, we have a tendency to valorize the Promethean Uranian energy and to, if not demonize, at least give a pretty negative view of Saturn. Okay, and that's why Liz Green wrote that book, Saturn, A New Look at an Old Devil. And Saturn certainly is the very archetype of problems, of difficulties, of oppression and depression and the hard reality of life, the bleak facts from death and taxes and all that Saturn. But Saturn is also the wisdom of experience and its prudent limits and restraints, its grounding and creating life-enhancing structures and forms and constraints that can be liberating because of their wise constraint. And if you think about the fact that it was precisely because there had been massive deregulation of the markets and of the banks and of what the banks could do with their with loans and mortgages and so forth and speculation, then we see how much it was unfettered Uranian free markets that were implicated in the collapse. So I'm trying to honor this greater complexity of the situation where it's not simply that it's like the good archetypes against the bad archetypes. That's not the way it works. It's a much more complex situation, and it requires a far more nuanced and well, it's exactly what Jung talks about when he says we have to hold the tension of opposites long enough and faithfully enough, and with enough alertness to the goods that are clashing. It's not simply good versus evil. It's often two goods. Like we want to serve freedom and we want to serve stability, and that would be a life-enhancing stability, just as the baby in the womb wants a stable womb. We appreciate anybody who's been through a wartime situation or an absolutely chaotic urban neighborhood will value peacetime, or will value the stability of that the Saturnian security can bring in. So these are goods that are having to be held. Another thing that's very typical for Saturn opposite Uranus periods is generational conflict. The old and the new, but also the old and the young. This is a huge factor in the Arab Spring in the Middle East. It's even a factor in the Arab Spring, the old guard against the new guard in the protest movements in Egypt and in North Africa, where it was basically the youthful parts of the dissident movements that got finally convinced the old guard to go in to join into the revolutions that were taking place on the square, this popular uprising. And but that's both sides of the dissident movement. But it's even more. Think about young people against the old oppressive dictators. But it's also a very profound generational conflict in terms of jobs right across Europe, especially Southern Europe, but also Britain too, but in Spain and Italy and Greece. Right now, in Spain, the young have 40% unemployment. 40%. 20% generally, 40% among the young. The unemployment here of young in the United States, of the youth, is very well known to us. And when was the last time Saturn was opposite Uranus? 1964 to 67 into early 68. Hope I die before I get old, talking about my generation gap. The generation gap was constellated, old versus young. Don't trust anybody over 30. The youth versus the establishment. It was constellated under the last time that Saturn opposed Uranus in the mid-60s. And we even had it, I even saw it at work during the 2008 election on the Democratic side, where I heard a young woman on the radio saying, if the older women pushed for Hillary Clinton over against Obama, she and her contemporaries were going to be so pissed that they had basically sabotaged, that was the word she used, the great idealistic revolution that she felt was could happen if Obama was elected. And in fact, I think I want to emphasize, I think probably most people in the room here are probably justifiably very disappointed in the Obama administration. Partly it's what he was up against and what he inherited, the wars, the financial crises and so forth. But it's also what he and also what he faced right away, an absolutely rigid, monolithic force on the part of the Republicans to negate any. They would rather, as you all know, have the United States basically fail economically so that they can get Obama out in 2012. But there's also been a kind of either, you can call it selling out, you can call it excessive prudence on his part, it can or a caution, or his being implicated with the whether it's Larry Summers or the appointments that he made in order to facilitate the transition from the Bush years to his years of overseeing the financial situation, basically permitted the foxes to continue to watch over the hen house with predictable results. So there's widespread dismay at the Obama, the lack of radical change that the Obama administration was able to come through on. And at the same time, I want to recall that just the very fact that there are 2 little African American girls running around in the White House today is a revolution that is permanent in a certain way, and is a profound revolution that stands despite the disappointments. I remember when the French editorial writer, woman, I can't remember her name, she said on the day after the election, the Americans have seized the torch of moral progress with this election, and we here in Europe stand in both admiration and in self-judgment. And it was a very strong statement and recognition, and that still stands despite the great problems of our current situation and the lack of progressive change that has taken place. But the entire, any of us that knows this perspective was aware that even though that when Obama was elected, he was, yes, he was coming in with all the power of this Uranus-Pluto energy, radical change, the civil rights movement, the empowerment of youth, etc. But it was also, we knew that he was basically going, his entire first term, if it is a first term, was going to be under this T-square, which is one of the hardest. He basically came in at the beginning of what Roosevelt came in under the end of. See, the Saturn-Uranus-Pluto, Roosevelt didn't begin his presidency until 1933. So he had the full gravity and massiveness of the crisis behind him, which in many ways empowered him to have more radical social legislation and economic reform. And even then it wasn't enough until later in the 30s to really shift the situation. But Obama came in at the beginning of it. So in certain ways, he spent the whole time under the, almost like under the boulder, pushing it up. And he's of course being blamed for things that he inherited, as well as for a kind of archetypal dynamic that you can't just legislate out. I mean, these are huge forces at work. Now, I haven't mentioned another big factor here, and that is the Plutonic has to do with the deep volcanic energies of nature. The Dionysian energies that, for example, relate to sexuality, and so you get, for example, the sexual revolution of the 60s. Uranus liberating the Plutonic id, the instincts, the sexual instincts, the libido, at the same time that they are being liberated and pressing and kind of breaking social customs, marriages, empowering youth, empowering women to not need to get married as early, and all these things that you can see this mutual activation going on. Well, again, we're getting that, and so, for example, again, there's many articles about the new sexual revolution, this time happening both much younger, interestingly, both much younger and much older, empowered in the older case by drugs, just as it was in the 60s. Different kinds of drugs, the pill as well as the illegal ones. But in addition, you have, it's like how, whether you have sexting or anonymous sex, or how young active sexual experience is taking place. And you also have, of course, polyamory, and then you also have here's another huge diachronic pattern, is the gay liberation movement, which begins here. 69 in particular is the breakthrough year in New York with Stonewall, etc. But and then moving into here into the Castro in the early 70s. But then, under this period, we're getting the end of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, the gay marriage, making constant progress, even to the point where there's now discussion of the ending of the federal law, Defense of Marriage Act. And in addition, of course, the T-square is going on. So, of course, for example, California and Prop 8 is a perfect example of how you simultaneously were getting the breakthrough in 2008 of Obama being elected and the defeat of that poignancy that many gays talked about, gay and lesbian people talked about the morning after the election in November 2008, simultaneously experiencing the joy of the Obama election and the great defeat in California, of all places, of Proposition 8. So it's that's the T-square in action. But I want to mention this other side of the Plutonic, which is the actual elemental volcanic energies that come through in earthquakes, in extreme climate change, in extreme weather patterns. And this is something that we have a different, because we have just we just go for another 27 minutes. I'm not taking a break tonight. If you don't, we'll just go through. Tomorrow morning, our session will have a break, of course. It's a longer session, but I figured any of you that need to take a quick break yourselves, please feel free. But this is something that really fits the archetypal symbolism, but I can't say that we have adequate, there isn't like data going back that I can see patterns for extreme weather in previous Uranus, extreme climate and extreme weather and volcanic, earthquake, etc. types of phenomena. I mean, there are some very interesting correlations with Pluto and earthquakes over the years.
What about the early 14th century when there was led to massive famines and the black triggered the
Yes, that was the mid-14th century, 1348 to into the early 1350s, and in fact that was a Saturn-Uranus-Pluto period. Good correlation there. I discussed that in Cosmos and Psyche when we're looking at the earlier periods. That was a really crushing period when really about a third of the population of Europe was decimated by the Black Plague. But I want to just right now not talk about things happening at the human level, but this is in a sense a human. What's the word they use where climate change is where there's yeah, thank you, anthropogenic. There's a human causal role that most scientists believe is at work in global warming and global climate change. And this is here's Jim Garrison, my friend who used to be the head of the State of the World Forum, and this is a few months this summer in Huffington Post. Just a few months ago, on April 14th, a massive storm swept out of the Rocky Mountains into the Midwest and South, igniting more than 150 tornadoes that killed 43 people across 16 states. It was one of the largest weather catastrophes in U.S. history. Then came an even bigger storm, the 2011 super outbreak that spread more than 300 tornadoes across 14 states from April 25 to 28, including an all-time one-day record of 188 tornadoes on April 27th, killing 339 people. Then came Hurricane Irene in August that ravaged the East Coast. Then the Texas drought induced wildfires in September, set further records for drought, wildfire damages, and economic destruction. By the way, we had, under this T-square, we had that, something like 1,000 wildfires were set at once in June '08. Big Sur was one of them, but it's right through California. 1,000 wildfires at once, set by lightning. That's the Uranian. Property damage from these events was calculated to be in the tens of billions of dollars, and they were only 4 of 10 multi-billion-dollar catastrophes so far in 2011 alone. Itself an historic record. More has happened since he wrote this. What is even more alarming is that almost every other country in the world can provide similar examples when you include all the blizzards, floods, earthquakes, heat waves, tsunamis, tornadoes, droughts, wildfires, hurricanes, cyclones, and other extreme weather events that have been occurring around the globe. I mean, every day we hear this every time we turn on the radio or look at the news on the internet. Combined with the collapsing resilience of communities to withstand the onslaught, you have a world literally at war with itself. It's like the earth is erupting. The real debate that should be calling forth our politicians is the fact that all of a sudden, at the same time, everywhere in the world, humanity is facing a common reality, radically rising weather turbulence at a scale not seen for a very long time, and we are all completely unprepared. Okay, so this is that deeper sort of elemental dimension of the Plutonic that is intertwined with human corporate behavior, ecological situation, a circumstance that we have sort of basically laid out the cards for, and now the hand is being played. So this is a huge factor. And if you take one of the paradigm examples of what has of this T-square, what happened in Japan, basically an earthquake, a tsunami, and a nuclear disaster that's still unfolding. All three happen, and this really carries the symbolism of this T-square very powerfully. That's the kind of energy, if that's the right word, and kind of archetypal situation that we're looking at on like Japan is like a paradigm example, but it's not alone. We've had all three of the major energy sources, oil, coal, and nuclear, have had a mega accident under this T-square. See, this is the T-square of the archetypal planetary combination of mega accidents and catastrophic collapses. Also mistakes, but mistakes that have vast consequences, such as what happened with the Gulf oil spill, or the huge coal mining disaster that happened here in the United States, but of course there's been many others in China, and then nuclear in Japan. So it's like all three of our main conventional energy power sources have gone through absolutely catastrophic accidents that have forced a a totally different orientation, which actually brings out towards energy, renewable energy, et cetera, and how to handle our fossil fuel dependency and so forth. And this is one of the positive things of Saturn-Uranus, which I emphasized last year, which is both the capacity for not only crisis management, but also preparedness, and where you basically see Uranus is the trickster, and Saturn-Uranus can often be like the negative trickster, or but you can also, Saturn is also being very prepared. It's doing, it's learning from mistakes. It's setting up structures that are based on the wisdom of experience that help us be prepared for crises, mistakes, disasters, etc. You see this in the response to all of these different crises, that legislation being introduced, etc. And same thing with the financial markets and the attempts to have new legislation in place that would protect from these catastrophes happening. I think totally inadequate legislation at this point, but that's the effort that is the positive potential of this T-square. I'm going to do a 2-minute comic interlude now, and then I'm going to ask, since there's a good number of people in the room who know this material very well and have been following these things very well, if you would care to throw in any more significant correlations that I'm leaving out that you know about, that we've discussed, etc. Hold on, Brian. And then, but first what I want to do is show something that was done in this last year. This is Stephen Colbert. And now Stephen Colbert was born in the mid-60s when Saturn was opposing that Uranus-Pluto conjunction of the 60s. So he carries that dialectic of opposites in him. So he displays it all the time by being, on the one hand, he's basically a creative, trickster, progressive comic, very Uranian, right? But he masks it as the Saturnian, conservative, right-wing blowhard, as if he's a Fox News commentator. And so you see how he's bringing together the Saturn and Uranus all the time, every performance, every day he's out there combining the two in order to, in certain ways, permit the comic jest to reveal things that wouldn't otherwise be allowed into the conversation. This is what the court jester has as a kind of archetypal role. John Cleese and I in this room did a whole course on a seminar on the comic genius, showing how in the collective psyche, the role of the comic, and then looking at their individual charts and also looking at what was happening in the collective. And it's been particularly under this, really the whole last decade, you could say that Stephen Colbert and Jon Stewart have, particularly Jon Stewart, they've really carried the moral center of gravity in the mainstream media, and constantly, in Colbert's case, in Jon Stewart's case, with his Saturn square Neptune, he's always cutting through the illusion. He's showing the spin. He's saying, here's what the politician is saying, here's what the corporation is saying, here's what's happening, and he's got a moral center that's holding. And same thing with Colbert, and particularly in these last years, they played a huge role in the election. Tina Fey did as well. Okay, so this The reason I'm showing you this 2-minute clip is because this is a remarkable, unexpected performance by Colbert. If you think about how, I mean, the whole history of nuclear power is related to this cycle. Every time Uranus and Pluto came into hard aspect, it goes back to a first splitting of the atom in the 1930s under the square. I won't go into all the details, but during the 60s, conjunction is when most of the nuclear power reactors around the world were built. And then after the Uranus-Pluto conjunction ended in the early 70s, there are many fewer nuclear power plants have been made since then. And then as soon as the square started, Uranus-Pluto, you started getting discussion of nuclear power being perhaps even our most viable source of energy in the future. Even James Lovelock in favor of it. Even our own the publisher of the Stuart Brand. Well, you're a regular encyclopedia, Brian. Thank you. Stuart Brand, the publisher of the Whole Earth Catalog, coming out, etc. That's the classic. The plutonic nuclear power, the incredible power of it, and technology combining, and again, it's being liberated into manifestation. But then the T-square, Saturn comes in, and the problems, the accidents, the Japanese tsunami and earthquake, etc. And so nuclear crises are very much connected to this T-square. Within weeks of when Stephen Colbert was born is when Dr. Strangelove was released, and all of you who were alive then will remember basically a whole generation saw the nuclear with delicious black comedy, Peter Sellers, and it was directed by Kubrick. Brilliant movie, Dr. Strangelove. So Colbert is carrying this energy, and watch how he basically does what comedy and art does generally, but particularly comedy. It releases psychic tensions and archetypal energies in a way that in some sense is releasing anxieties that are constellated in the background. Now this is a conversation he's having with the head of Plowshares. Jesse, that's the name of it, right? The Plowshares Fund, basically a fund that is seeking to end nuclear weaponry and the nuclear power, and the danger is helping to bring to consciousness of the collective and of political authorities the tremendous danger of the nuclear threat. And he is doing an interview with the head of Plowshares Fund, and as usual, he's playing the kind of conservative right-wing, and he's talking about how, well, this is a good thing. At first, he talks about how all the nuclear bombs that are pointed at New York and are pointed right at even Manhattan, and he says that, yeah, they're pointed at me. That's how important I am, and then he's making light of the whole situation, and then watch what he does here in this remarkable mime performance. you see how the great artist basically holds the whole archetypal, he expresses the archetypes, he holds the whole gestalt in him or her and becomes a channel of it, an embodiment of it. And in this case, simultaneously showing the destruction. He's the one that invited this person who he wants this person to basically get his message across, but at the same time he's releasing. I mean, I doubt that any of us watch this, even as this little kid's on the without laughing, yet the reality of it is, of course, absolutely horrific. And yet he's able to carry that perfect contradiction. Okay, Brian, you've got a thought or a question, and then I want to...
There are a few things. First off...
No, just one thing so we can have, because we've got limited time.
We can talk on the other things later, but nobody noticed in the mainstream media that this extreme weather happened at the same time that they killed bin Laden, and when people talked about it, told my sister about it, they said, oh, you're crazy, you just look for coincidences, you have a hard time understanding that there are coincidences, that if you had my mathematical, and I didn't think it was a coincidence, that whenever there are acts of violence, always coincide with extreme weather or natural disasters.
Well, that's an opinion that would be certainly held by many indigenous peoples. That I can't comment specifically on that coincidence. I think many of us were alert to the symbolism of, for example, an earthquake that would make the Washington Monument chip at the top, destabilize, the fact that earthquakes are happening on both coasts simultaneously of the United States, the great imperial power of the world right now. Very seldom do earthquakes happen on the East Coast with that kind of consequence. And as a general, while one has to guard against, a kind of naive projection of a need for everything to be, this means that, but I certainly think that we should be alert to the symbolic resonance of events and the fact that there has been a certain violence perpetrated on the earth and particularly in the decades since from the 1960s on, tremendous acceleration of industrial corporate violence on the earth. Much of what's happening now can be seen as causal, or at least as potentially causal in a way that scientists could draw links, but much of it also could be seen as almost a kind of moral drama, where I remember when Bush, at the time of the Iraq War, that one of the big shuttles or something fell in Texas, and someone wrote a little essay saying if this had happened in the Roman Empire at the time that the emperor had done something like a new military venture, and that kind of a sign came from the sky into his hometown, there would be the priests and prophets and senators would all have had something to say. So I do want to be alert to that kind of symbolic resonance, and in many ways that's the larger project that we're doing right here. Matthew, Jessica, Chad, any of you have I know there's other things that other things that I could mention that I want to invite you to add during our remaining minutes. Artemis, anything? I like your idea, Artemis, of how much I've gestured in this, but in this direction, but the extent to which we've been talking about a collective field here that the whole world is going through, and that is certainly as many people said, finally when Saturn just at least is moved out of the T-square a little bit, it's still going to come back into broad orb next summer. So we're not out, this is me talking right now for a second, we're not out of the woods exactly, but of course depends on what you mean by woods anyway. Because just because Saturn is going to go, I mean, Pluto has its own woods, the depths of, so, and what's set in motion during this T-square, depending on our response to it, many years into the future will be affected by what's going on right now. But we've generally been describing here world transits that are affecting the whole collective psyche. And yet each of us are getting these world transits affecting us. They're going across our own personal individual charts. So if like, for example, that T-square, when it was tight at the beginning of the cardinal signs, if you had planets in the early cardinal signs, as many people do, I mean, you're really cooking. I mean, all sorts of things are happening in your life, and collapsing, and crises, and unsustainable, like people who would just say, something's got to give. You know, this is just an unsustainable situation, whether it's, you know, financially, or employment, or a marriage, or a relationship, or a relationship to the boss, or the internal psychological state, whatever. So we're each, especially if it's crossing your chart as a personal transit, you're really getting it. But we're also experiencing these huge generational phenomena, so that we're all breathing together in this. We're all experiencing what's in the air, what's in the zeitgeist. And when I wrote the ending of Cosmos and Psyche about 6 years ago, I said a lot what's going to affect how this Uranus square Pluto unfolds during now for the next decade. A lot will depend on, for example, how the generation that was born in the 60s with that Uranus-Pluto conjunction, 60 to the early 70s, those people are carrying that energy in a very particular way. Jon Stewart, Stephen Colbert, and Obama are three of them right there that we've happened to talk about. But right around many of the leaders of these movements around the world are from that generation, and in some sense have not been as active or been enabled to be active until that energy again came into the collective psyche, and like the way they're surfers, and the wave has finally come. And as Artemis wrote to me, many in that generation and born in the 60s and younger in their 30s are saying, and in their 20s, that they've been waiting all their life for this to happen, for this energy, for a in a sense it's both the energy and some sense like the structures are there to permit it. Like once the Occupy Wall Street had set up a form that it could occupy, then it just caught. I brought up Saturn moving out of the T-square, just getting past the T-square there at the end of the summer into September, and then finally the United States catches up with the rest of the world in having mass emancipatory demonstrations and demonstrations for radical change. So those were a couple of points that you wanted to emphasize.
Something else I've noticed as well as far as diachronic patterning, that in the 60s there seemed to be so much more an emphasis on the individual, on me, my liberation, and this deep dark shadow of not acknowledging all the sexism, all the misogyny, the racism and stuff that was still there, needed to be dealt with. And it feels like what's being called forward now, what I'm witnessing, is people being more concerned with the collective. It's as if all the rebellion and all the sexual experimentation and the messiness that my parents and generations before me had to go through to work it out, so that now, like I feel so much more stable in so many situations when I look back and think, well, maybe in the 60s, if I had been living then, I'd be acting out in all kinds of ways. And I just feel like that there's a maturation that has happened since the 60s to now that with the liberation movements, it's just more of a collective focus, more of a concern on something greater than just me, my narrow self-interest, or my single liberation.
I think in many ways that you had to have a kind of like the so-called me decade of the 70s. There had to be a kind of sufficient autonomy built to break away from previous structures. And then what we had was the Uranus-Neptune conjunction from the mid-80s through the 1990s. And Uranus-Neptune had a whole, Stan Groff and I watched this in the phenomena that people experienced in their breathwork sessions and psychedelic sessions and shamanic journeys and so forth, was that there was a movement from a focus more on individual psycho-spiritual liberation and much more attuning into the whole, like the whole Earth community or all of humanity, or tuning into a more collective psyche that it's almost less important whether I make it as an individual and to have a ego death experience and I'm reborn and I'm free, I'm liberated, I'm potentiated. It's almost immaterial to me if all of us are not going through that, are not transformed. And so this is an example of how we're in an evolutionary process in which every single preceding both Uranus-Pluto conjunction of the 60s, but also the things that have happened in the meantime, where there's a tuning into the anima mundi in the meantime, and a kind of a more of a global consciousness. The internet played a big role in that. The ending of the Cold War and the opening up into a more completely planetary interrelating consciousness. All these things have served this. Jessica, please.
I just wanted to add one thing about the children of the 90s. You know, here we are, the people of the 60s, excited, like, yes, it's finally here, we're ready to catch this wave. And the children of the 90s, with that Uranus-Neptune conjunction they're born with, the Uranus square Pluto that we're in right now is going to go across that part of all of their birth charts. So that Uranus-Neptune is really going to be activated in all of those children who are now coming of age. And so to witness that rite of passage simultaneously with all the children of the 60s, and what we can do together with both of those styles or modes of consciousness, that we can build and bridge so much more.
That's great. And that generation that's born with the Uranus-Neptune conjunction that both influenced those of us who are older, the energies influenced us. We went through that, but many people were born in the late 80s and the 90s, the so-called millennials. They've got that energy in them. They're carrying it, and they bring. In fact, that's exactly what I said in Cosmos and Psyche. It's like so much will depend on the generations that were born during the Uranus-Pluto and Uranus-Neptune conjunctions, what their particular gifts and historical responsibility that they bring into the whole as to what will unfold. Matthew, anything more? Chad? No. Okay, we're past 9. It's been a kind of Niagara Falls onslaught of material, but anyway, we needed to get enough out there to give a bit of a portrait of the drama we're in from an archetypal point of view. Thank you very much for coming. Wait, hold on. Okay, go to the side. Okay.
What?
I'll talk to you in 5 minutes. Okay, 5 minutes. Thank you very much.